it is really the municipalities that have the final authority in terms of whether a livestock operation can locate or expand, or where a livestock operation can locate and expand. And hopefully by the end of this hour, you'll have a better understanding of what the roles of the municipalities are and what the roles of the province are. Now, not to insult your intelligence, I'm starting with what is a livestock operation, because under every single piece of legislation or regulation, the province does have a set of definitions, because they need to know exactly how that term in that legislation applies. So from a planning perspective, in the Planning Act, we have a very specific definition of livestock operation. And what it means is it's a permanent or semi-permanent facility or non-grazing area where at least 10 animal units of livestock are kept or raised. I'm going to talk a little bit about animal units in a minute, but really what you need to glean from this is the importance of the fact that it has to be a non-grazing area to trigger the definition of a livestock operation in the Planning Act, and there is also a size component. Now, 10 animal units is a very, very small operation, or it can be a hobby farm, for example, but that was the number that was chosen as the trigger size for where this definition would apply. So really what this means is this. This is not considered a livestock operation under the Planning Act. So any sort of situation where you have cattle that you're grazing, or lands that are just being grazed by cattle, or perhaps there's a situation where you use bale grazing or swath grazing in the winter, and the cattle moves across the field in such a way that there's never significant manure deposited that has to be removed mechanically and redistributed, this would actually not even trigger a consideration as a livestock operation under the Planning Act. It wouldn't trigger the approval process, and it wouldn't have a lot of the siting requirements. That being said, municipalities can still regulate grazing in their zoning bylaws, but from a provincial perspective, this does not trigger the whole definition of a livestock operation. Now, if there is an overwintering area where you keep the cow, you have a cow-calf area, etc., that particular site where the cattle are actually gathered together and manure may build up, that would trigger the definition of a livestock operation. And really the reason for that under the Planning Act is because what the Planning Act tries to do and what planning tries to do is to minimize conflicts and to ensure developments are appropriately directed. You would generally not see the type of potential land use conflicts between grazing sort of operation like this and residential development, just because you don't have the same sort of concentration of livestock or of manure being produced, flies, etc., or any other kind of nuisances that could potentially come up when you have residents and livestock operations in close proximity. So unless you have that type of operation, all of these rules will apply to you. And certainly the manure rules apply under the Environment Act regardless. The really important questions that you need to ask when you are looking at either establishing or expanding your livestock operation are things like, where is the operation planned or located? Now, where is really fundamentally the most important question, but to be perfectly honest, all of these questions have influence on each other, so they certainly can't be considered in isolation. So we need to ask, where is the operation planned or located? Now, clearly, if you're, if you already have a farm and you're looking to diversify into livestock, you are going to be a little bit constrained in terms of where, because perhaps you're already located in a municipality, etc. But there are still things to consider within that municipality and even within whatever site you have planned. And of course, also, if you're expanding, you're going to be a little bit constrained in terms of where you're going to be located, because usually people expand where they're already located. We do have situations, of course, where people come in from out of province, and then they may have a little bit more in terms of options of where they locate. But it is a major factor of consideration. The second thing to really consider is what type of operation, obviously species, and certainly management style within the species. And so whether that's, like, again, a feedlot for beef or a cow-calf operation, etc. And then what size is the operation? And size becomes very important when you're thinking about where that operation is going. It also becomes important in terms of triggering different requirements that, that come into play for certain sizes of operations. Another factor that's important to consider is, how is manure being stored? Do you have an earth manure storage facility, etc.? And that sort of thing can actually impact the distance you need to be away from a residential development. And again, that impacts where. And finally, and this is something that I'm not sure people consider as much at this stage of the game, but before you do anything, you really need to look at if you have the necessary land base available for manure application. Manure, of course, can only be applied as a fertilizer to a growing crop. Certainly have to keep an eye on the soil levels of nitrogen and phosphorus, and so having the necessary land base, whether it's owned or leased or accessed, is a really important consideration first thing early in the game. So before I get into where, as I've said, that's the most important factor, I really want to talk about how size is determined. So I don't always know if this is well understood, and you know, we like to throw around jargon, certainly in land use planning, we're bad for that. But we determine size of a livestock operation based entirely on the animal unit. And what the animal unit is, it's the number of animals of a particular category of livestock that will excrete 73 kilograms of total nitrogen in a 12-month period. So clearly the number of animals you have is important, but the number of animals in terms of what that means for animal units depends on the species and also the type and size of animals that you have. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples in a minute. Really, the whole point of the animal unit is to find some sort of way to compare sizes by looking at different species. So when we talk about the size of a livestock operation under the Planning Act and the provincial planning regulation, we only look at the total number of animal units. We're not as concerned, is it pigs, is it chicken? We're not concerned about that other than what it means in terms of the total animal unit. The animal unit was originally used under the Farm Practices Guidelines, and it was actually adopted under the provincial planning regulation as an animal unit table in the last round of the provincial planning regulation rewrite, and that was in 2011. So this is our way of normalizing across species, and this is what it looks like. So these are just some examples. This is not the entire table. I couldn't possibly fit it on a slide in a way that anyone would be able to read it, but just to give you an illustration of what we're talking about. So for a dairy operation, for example, you look at the number of cows, both milking and dry, and within this calculation is also included associated livestock, so things like calves, etc. So you really just need to count the number of cows you have, and per each cow, there is 2 animal units of livestock. And again, that's based on the nitrogen generated. And so, for example, 50 head dairy would be 100 animal units. Beef cows, again, with associated livestock, so, you know, for each cow-calf pair, approximately, it would be 1.25 animal units total. Each head of beef feeder cattle, 0.769 animal units. Hogs, farrow to finish, it's 1.25. Each weanling is 0.033, etc. And you can go from there. So it's really different for each animal or each species of animal, and even within the species, depending on the type of operation, there can be differences. So this is what I say. You look at the species, you just use the species to determine the animal units, and then the size of the livestock operation is based entirely on the animal unit calculation. So I'd like to get to where, because I've said this is the most important question. So this is a breakdown of Manitoba in terms of Agro-Manitoba. What are the planning districts and what are the municipalities? The ones in white are the municipalities that are planning on their own. They have their own particular development plan, and they identify areas in their municipality where agriculture will occur, where is their urban development occurring, where do they have their recreational development, etc. In the gray, those areas are grouped together as planning districts. And so those planning districts, actually, those municipalities and those planning districts plan together, and they have one plan for the entire area. It does the same thing as the municipal development plans, just covers a larger area, and they can share resources that way. In terms of Manitoba's requirements for planning, Manitoba's original Planning Act was 1976. The latest rewrite occurred in 2006, and in that case, Manitoba made land use planning mandatory for all of the municipalities. So every single municipality in Manitoba must have a development plan, and every single municipality in Manitoba must have in their development plan a livestock operation policy. Manitoba is unique in North America, certainly in that regard, and possibly everywhere else as well. And what that means is each municipality, whether it's within a planning district or on their own, must identify areas within their municipality where livestock operations are allowed or will be considered, where livestock operations may not be allowed, and where livestock operations are restricted to a certain size. And what the Planning Act does, and the provincial planning regulation within that, is give guidance to how that may be considered. And I'm going to touch on that in a minute. I did want to say, since amalgamation, there are 30 planning districts, and there are 36 rural municipalities that are not planning in a planning district, so they're on their own. What that really means then is that there are actually 66 different set of rules in the province, depending on where you're locating, that decide where livestock operations are allowed, where they are not allowed, and where they are restricted. So when I say where is really important, you can sort of start to get the picture of why that is so very important. There are also separation distances that I'm also going to cover a little bit later, but you should know that while the province sets minimum ones, municipalities can actually set them higher. So that can change from municipality to municipality, and really what that is are the distances that are required between residential and livestock development. So I mentioned there are rules in the provincial planning regulation as to what can be considered by a municipality when they're setting out their livestock operation policy. I'm going to use this one as an example. This is one of the first development plans that came through with the livestock operation policy. And this is the former municipality of Langford. It's now amalgamated with North Cyprus, but now we'll just look at what's currently in effect, and this is for the arm of Langford. You can see that the town at the top there, that's Nipois, and this is the Assiniboine Delta Aquifer, or roughly where the Assiniboine Delta Aquifer is within this particular municipality. Now, one of the things that a municipality can consider when setting their livestock operation policy are things like whether or not there's an aquifer present, proximity to waterways, to drinking water, recreational areas, towns, etc. So I wanted to show you how this particular municipality handled this challenge. So they looked at where the Assiniboine Delta Aquifer is, and of course the town of Nipois. Then they looked at their soils information, and the reason they look at their soils information is because the provincial planning regulation is very clear that no livestock operation should be established on soils that are class 6 or 7 for agriculture, so really non-agricultural lands, or on soils that are organic. Again, because grazing is not considered a livestock operation for the purposes of planning, of course those lands can still be used for grazing. But in terms of setting up a particular site for a livestock operation, class 6 and class 7 soils are really off limits. I apologize, there's no legend on this map, but the orange in this particular map they are class 6 soils. The browns are class 1, the greens are all class 2, 3, light greens class 4. So you can see that actually the bulk of the non-agricultural soils actually exist over that aquifer area. And in fact, they are located within what was the former PFRA community pasture. So they took that information on the aquifer, they took the information on the soils, they looked at where the town of Nipois was, they looked at Lake Irwin, which is in red on this map, just south of the town, and said, okay, that's our seasonal recreational area. At the time, too, it was also a drinking water source. So based on all of that, they chose areas where they would restrict livestock operation. So if you look at, for example, the blue area right around, like within half a mile of the town of Nipois, they only allow existing livestock operations or expansion to approximately 99 animal units. So that's pretty small because we've said, 2 animal units per dairy cow. So that gives you an example. I always like to use the dairy cows because they're the easiest one to just calculate. So you're talking about less than 50 head of dairy. And then if you look at the purple area, they've called that their rural LO limited. That extends a further half-mile outside of the rural LO existing area. And in that area, they've allowed new and expanding operations to a maximum of 299 animal units. So that's really as large as a livestock operation is allowed to go in that particular area. The green around Lake Irwin, they have a limit there of 125 animal units. And in the brown area, or the light orangey area, over the aquifer, they have chosen a limit of 800 animal units, recognizing that there are some areas within that where there may be clay lenses and larger livestock operations may be considered. They will consider larger than 800 animal units, but the preference is that everything stay under 800 animal units. And in the areas where there's white, there is no maximum size consideration. They will consider livestock operations to any particular size. I want to show you two. So that one was pretty detailed. Not all municipalities have handled it in the same way. This is for the arm of Oakland, Wawanesa. If you look at their AL agricultural limited areas, those are the pink areas. They have a maximum threshold there of 200 animal units, whereas the rest of the areas in the white that are agricultural general, they will consider livestock operations to any size. So it really differs from municipality to municipality. The provincial rules still apply. So for example, no matter what, whether they put it on their map or not, there's no livestock operations allowed on class 6 or 7 soils, etc. And I just want to give you one more example in the eastern part of the province, and that's the arm of Hanover. And I wanted to use this one because they actually have quite a lot of designated rural residential development, and those are the pink areas. And those designated areas are where there's a lot of housing. So there are a lot of residents. And we do treat rural residential areas the same way as we treat urban areas in terms of separating from livestock operations. So in this case, for the arm of Hanover, they have their green areas, which are general agriculture, and where livestock operations are allowed to no particular maximum size or will be considered to no particular maximum size. And then they have the yellow areas where they do have a lot of residential development, they do have a lot of existing livestock operations, and they do have land-based issues. So in those particular cases, they give preference to expanding livestock operations over existing. Please be aware when I'm saying they will consider, again, at the end of the day, the municipality has the final authority as to whether or not a livestock operation can go ahead, but what the development plan does is set out areas where they can at least be considered. So I keep talking about separation distances. This is what they look like. This is actually the table that is in the provincial planning regulation. So it is a graduated table. So the larger the livestock operation within those sizes on the left there, the larger the livestock operation, the higher the separation distance becomes. So of course for 10 to 100 animal units, which are smaller, it's going to be a smaller separation distance requirement than for, say, the size range of 401 to 800 animal units. And really the reason for that is the entire separation distance table is set up so that conflicts or potential for conflicts can be minimized between residential, for example, and agricultural development, particular livestock operations. You'll notice also then within this table, if you look at the first two columns after the size column, this is from a single residence. So single residences are within the designated agricultural area. So the expectation is those people who live within the designated agricultural area should recognize that they are in an agricultural area where such things as livestock operations do exist. So the separation distances are actually much lower than they are for the two following columns where you're talking about designated areas. And a designated area is something like a town, an urban area, or a designated rural residential area, which may be a cluster of residential housing in the rural areas. And the setbacks there for livestock operations are about 5 times higher than they are for the individual residents. And again, that's the idea that there's more people living there, the potential for conflicts is higher, so we're going to maximize that separation distance consideration. These are expected to be applied reciprocally or mutually. So if you can't have a livestock operation setting up within, let's say, 200 meters of a house, you really shouldn't be having a house setting up within 200 meters of a livestock operation. And that's the way they're actually intended to be applied, because if the whole point of it is to minimize the potential for conflict, that really does apply both ways. So that's what this looks like from a separation distances standpoint. Again, it's measured specifically in animal units. The species is pretty irrelevant here, other than the fact that there is a higher separation distances for an earth and manure storage facility and also for a feedlot. It doesn't show on this table, but that first column also applies for a feedlot. And the idea being the potential for odor, etc., and ensuing conflicts is higher with those types of things than it is for just a barn, for example, or a non-earthen manure storage facility. And when I say it's 5 times higher for a designated area, that's really what that looks like. That particular size range there is for a 101 to 200 animal unit size livestock operation. This is actually an individual case that occurred in the Springfield. Those 4 red dots that you see on that map are individual residences that, for whatever reason, came to exist over time. You can see that a lot of the land is not in active agricultural use. Some of it's treed, some of it's grape farmland. So when they were doing their development plan, they decided to look at these clusters of residences and actually designate them. Well, once you designate them, which would be that light blue area, and you see those orange circles are the separation distances for the individual residences from livestock operations for 101 to 200 animal units. Once you designate that, that separation distance blows up quite a bit into what is that blue area. And that actually, once it went out, captured a dairy within that particular area. So it did not meet the separation distances. The redesignation did not go ahead. In terms of just identifying what's existing there, there's not really a lot of point for a municipality to redesignate. Usually we say if you're redesignating, it's because you want more development to go there. And clearly if a dairy was that close to it, it was not perhaps the best place to have further rural residential development. So just to give you an idea what that looks like, separation distances, again, these are the provincial minimums. Municipalities can set them higher in their individual municipalities. They don't set them a lot higher. A lot of them don't set them higher at all. Where we do see them setting them higher is on the individual separation distances more than the designated areas, because those are smaller. So I've talked a lot about what are the things that you need to consider in terms of siting. What I want to show you is bringing the Planning Act rules together with some of the other rules under the Environment Act, the Water Protection Act, etc. I worked on this with a few of my colleagues, and we looked at what does that really look like in terms of the province for development constraints for livestock operations. So I'm going to show you a bunch of different layers here, and you'll sort of get the picture of what's happening. On this particular map, the first thing we're going to look at is we've called it a no development zone. So this is where there are land-based issues, and that's due to the amount of phosphorus in the soils. And the 2 municipalities that you see grayed out as no development for pigs, particularly, are Hanover and Le Brocquerie. Here we're adding the soils layer that I talked about. So anything that's class 6 or 7 or organic is actually blacked out as a no development zone. And the stuff that shows up in green are classes 1 to 5. You'll notice the national parks are in white because those are not considered within areas for potential development for livestock operations. Then we're adding the water considerations. So in this case, we blacked out any water body that's greater than 160 acres. And that's really because if you have a water body that extends outside of your property and you have a livestock operation, then you do have to apply a 100-meter buffer to it. So that includes a 100-meter buffer. It includes the designated drains with a 100-meter buffer is also required in provincial legislation or regulation, and also any active production wells with a 100-meter buffer. Some more no development zones, as I mentioned, provincial parks, protected areas, provincial forests, community pastures, and crown lands. So any of the public lands where, and again, of course, crown lands can have grazing on them, but for the purposes of establishing what we're calling a livestock operation under the Planning Act, they're removed from consideration for development. And then on this, we have added also all of the urban areas. This is what we call the planning layer. So this is what I particularly work on. They've added the urban areas here, any of the residential or recreational designated areas. And what we did was, because as I showed you, the separation distances change depending on the size of livestock operations, and of course we can't show every particular size of livestock operation, we elected to use the 800 animal unit separation distances based on the provincial minimum requirements. So that's what's shown here. Anything blacked out is also including that 2,400 meters from any designated residential, recreational, and urban area that would be required for an 800 animal unit operation. The other thing we've included as blacked out here are any areas where municipalities have a 300 animal unit size restriction. So in this case, if you look just east of Lake Manitoba, there are the arms of Coldwell and St. Laurent. They do not consider new livestock operations at a size of 300 animal units or greater, although they do allow some opportunities for expansion for their existing producers. You'll notice that there's a lot that's blacked out on the east. A lot of that has to do with the soils and the separation distances that are required. There is one error on this map that I do need to point out, and that's the arm of Brokenhead, which shows up as all in black. That isn't the case. It's not all rural residential. That is just an error in our mapping that I did want to mention, so nobody who lives in Brokenhead, if you're on here, starts to get concerned. So that's the planning layer where there are development plan restrictions. This is another development plan restriction layer. I did mention that municipalities can restrict the size of the livestock operation to a maximum. So anything showing up yellow on this map, and that's really, I think, the east side of the municipalities of DeSalleberry and Franklin, where their soils aren't as good as on the west side, they have a size restriction of 600 animal units. On the purple, they have a size restriction of anywhere from 1201 to 2400 animal units. And in the orange area, you see right next to the purple, that's pretty much the arm of Morris, and they do have a 1200 animal unit size restriction on the entire municipality. So that's all the planning stuff factored into this development constraint map. And then finally, we have what we call the unlikely to develop, and that's where you're getting into the unconfined sand and gravel aquifer, and that includes, of course, Assiniboine Delta aquifer, etc. And it's not to say that livestock operations can't develop there, but that is certainly a major factor of consideration if you're planning to develop a livestock operation. You can sort of see if you're looking at Dauphin Lake, for example, if you look on the west side there, or even certainly along Lake Winnipeg, it's all black along the edges, and that's because there's a lot of designated recreational development there, and of course that 2,400 meter setback also comes into play. So in terms of this particular map, the only places that livestock operations could really be considered to no particular maximum size are the green areas. And of course, there are all kinds of other things that come into play and consideration of the individual livestock operations, but we really just wanted to sort of look at a snapshot of what this would look like for the province of Manitoba. So by now, you're probably getting the impression that size matters. That's good. I need you to, out of this entire presentation, understand why where is so important and also why size is so important. So we've looked a little bit about what size means in terms of where a municipality allows livestock operations to go. The other thing that's very important from a size perspective is the operation 300 animal units or over? Because if it is, it does trigger a whole other set of rules, both under the Planning Act and also under the Environment Act, under the Livestock Manure and Mortalities Management Regulation. Basically, at a size of 300 animal units or greater, all livestock operations are required to go through the technical review process, and this process is set out under the Planning Act. Technical review process really is 4 basic things, and this took me some time to distill this down because it is a long process and it can be complex, but really it involves 4 basic things. That is, 1, a site assessment form is prepared by the producer. I say or consultant. Most times it is a consultant. The site assessment form is, in fact, about 27 pages long. It is online. Certainly you can access it, and I do have a link later on in the presentation. Everything to do with the technical review process is very much in the public eye. So there is a site assessment form. It can be filled out by the producer. Generally it is filled out by a consultant. Once the site assessment form is actually completed, it is posted on the public registry for 30 days. So it goes actually up on provincial website, and there is public notification via newspaper ad. Public comments are posted, so anybody from the public, and I mean anybody, because it goes up on the website, so you don't have to have members of the public that live in the municipality necessarily, or even the general area. Anyone can comment, and their comments are posted online, and they are addressed by the technical review committee and or the producer. The technical review committee is comprised of membership from the departments of Indigenous Municipal Relations, Sustainable Development, Infrastructure, and of course Manitoba Agriculture. It is actually overseen and administered by IMR. So once that report is finished, it is posted and sent to the municipality. So this seems very simple. Again, the site assessment form is long. It does take a while to fill out. Once it's filled out, it's posted for 30 days. then the public comments, then the technical review looks at it again, and then the report is posted and sent to the municipality. And then it's still not done because we also have another thing to go through once that. I do want to talk a little bit first though about the site assessment form. I mentioned it's 27 pages. It does require a lot of information, things like the site, specifically the site that's being chosen, the name of the operation, size, is there a premises identification number, because you need to have that. In terms of water, things like what nutrient management zone is, and that really has to do with whether or not it's class 6 or 7 soil, for example. What is the source of the water to be used, quality, what's protection, manure, is it liquid manure, solid manure, volume, storage, odor control, etc. Land base, we talked about that. There are setbacks that you have to have from property lines for manure application. What is your crop rotation, those kinds of calculations. How will the livestock mortalities be managed? And then from a land use planning perspective, is what's being proposed consistent with the municipal development plan? Does it meet all the rules the municipality has in its zoning bylaw? Does it meet separation distance requirements, etc.? Is it next to crown land? Is it adjacent to? What are the truck haul routes and access points? And then things like also, are there any species at risk in the area where the livestock operation is going to be located? And that information can actually be found online outside of the site assessment form. So I did mention that it is all public. This was actually off the public registry, and anyone can go onto the public registry and look at any application that's been put in the past, what the decision was, what the technical review was. This is an example of an application in the arm of Reshot. And you can see this in the middle of the circle. That's the area where the livestock operation is, and then they show you what the 3-kilometer notification is. So everyone within 3 kilometers is actually notified that this livestock operation has applied to establish or expand. And here you see where the lands are that they're going to be using for manure application. The lands with the AA, of course, they're under agreement. L is leased and O is owned. And so you sort of see what's nearby. You can see the number of houses that fall within that 3-kilometer area. And all of that information is available to the public. So that application goes back to the council, and the technical review report goes back to the council. And as I said, even though now they've gone through the technical review process, the council has the report, there is now a conditional use process that has to go through, or that the application has to go through, and that's actually part of the Planning Act as well. So the conditional use process is mandatory for anything 300 animal units or greater. Absolutely, there's no option. A municipality can set in their zoning bylaw a lower than 300 animal unit threshold. So there are some municipalities that say anything over 100 animal units has to go through conditional use, or sometimes it's even lower. Many municipalities just use the provincial requirement of 300 animal units. What makes a difference is the notification process and the enhanced notification. So regardless of what the municipality sets the conditional use threshold at, no matter what, there is an enhanced notification of property owners within 3 kilometers for anything 300 animal units or greater. So every single property owner within 3 kilometers of a proposed livestock operation is notified that there is a proposed livestock operation coming forward. They can come to the conditional use hearing and they can ask questions, they can comment on the technical review report, etc. Even if it's under 300 animal units and it's a conditional use, the public notification is only 100 meters. And that's what's true for every other conditional use under the Planning Act. It's really livestock operations of a size of 300 animal units or greater that have this additional consideration for notification. So what is the conditional use process? Well, they really need to give public notice, usually 30 days prior to hearing. And so anyone can come and speak at the hearing, including the producer and any member of the public. So anyone can come forward. Producers can certainly speak on their behalf. People can come forward and speak on behalf of the application. People can come forward and speak against the application. They can come and ask questions, etc. Ideally, we're hoping the public concerns and questions can get addressed earlier on during that public technical review process where it's all online, but sometimes not everything gets addressed perhaps, or maybe people have additional questions and then they can come forward at the actual conditional use hearing. The technical review report is presented at the hearing if it's for 300 animal units or greater. As I mentioned, conditional use hearings can occur for lower than 300 animal units if the municipality sets it that way, but there is no technical review report unless it's 300 animal units or greater. And then council either rejects the application or approves the application with or without conditions. And the type of conditions that they can put on a conditional use are things like, having a cover on a manure storage facility, or requiring a shelter belt. They can require municipality or applicants to enter into development agreements in terms of timing of construction, or even some financial consideration for road repairs, etc. They are limited in terms of the conditions they can attach regarding manure. They cannot attach any conditions regarding storage, transportation, or application of manure to land, because those are fully regulated by the province. But they can, as I said, require a cover or a shelter belt. The really important thing to note on the conditional use process, and this is where we come back to what I said before, and then municipalities have really the final say, is that there is no appeal. So if a municipality turns down an application, the livestock producer cannot appeal that decision. So after an approval, you're still not done. What the conditional use approval actually gives you is the opportunity to come back to the municipality and say, okay, I need a development permit, or I need a building permit, and I do have your approval, and this is what you've agreed to. You said I could be this size and I could have this operation. So then they come back to the municipality, and they have to do whatever they need to do to meet those conditions of approval that a municipality may have put on the conditional use approval. Like I said, development agreement, building location certificate, and then variances. Variances can come into play if, for example, there is something in some particular way that you can't meet the requirements in the zoning bylaw in terms of the separation distance. Like, let's say you're far away from everything except for one particular house, and for whatever reason that separation distance is not met. Provided the owner of that house has no issues, you can get a variance, or the council can grant a variance saying you didn't meet the separation distances, but you can still go ahead and build. And the other thing you need are, so those are your municipal requirements, what you need to talk to the municipality about. What you also need are some provincial requirements as well. And really the provincial requirements are things like a water rights license, annual source water monitoring analysis report. You need a permit for your manure storage facility. You may need an access permit if you're on the public road or PTH. You definitely need a building permit with approval from the Office of the Fire Commission. You also need, if you're 300 animal unit or greater, you do need to get a permit for confined livestock area. So for something like a feedlot, if it's 300 animal units or greater, and no matter what type of livestock operation you are, if you are a size of 300 animal units or greater, you need to apply, or you need to file an annual manure management plan with the Department of Sustainable Development every year. So those, in a nutshell, are all the rules. I do want to just quickly touch on the fact that, I talked about conditional use hearing and how there's opportunity for the public to be involved, and also obviously for the producer who is applying for the livestock operation. But during that whole development plan process, where municipalities are identifying where livestock is allowed, where livestock is not allowed, during their whole zoning bylaw process, there are very public components to both of those things. And that is actually mandated under the Planning Act. So there is a lot of opportunity for members of the public to get involved, certainly for producers to get involved. And I do encourage you as producers to get involved with your municipal planning processes, because that really defines where agriculture and where livestock development can occur in your area. So it's very important. I mean, if you're existing livestock operation and suddenly in the plan it tells you you can't be there, you can still continue as a legally non-conforming use, but it certainly does make things difficult for you if, for example, your operation has been destroyed by fire, and you certainly can't expand. So it's something to be aware of, and it's certainly something to be involved with. And municipal councils are very good to work with, I found, for the most part, in terms of talking to them about what the impacts are and what does this mean for their municipality. And sometimes they don't always know, so it certainly doesn't hurt to come forward and give information about your operation, or talk about how you might be impacted, or even what your future plans may be, and what that means in the context of what the municipality is proposing. And then, of course, like I said, the technical review process at 300 animal units or greater is very much a public process, as is the conditional use hearing. This link here tells you everything you need to know about the technical review process. You can access the site assessment online there and find out anything else that you need to know there. And I guess now I'm just open for questions if anyone has any, and hopefully I haven't overwhelmed you with all the rules. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sherry. That was awesome. We do have a few questions. Okay, I will start with, if approval lies with the municipality, what can be done or what approach can be used with ORMs that don't seem to support livestock operation development?
Yeah, it is a problem. And sometimes I don't even know if it's necessarily the municipalities, but certainly some members of the public within a particular municipality. For our part, for the department, on the department's behalf, we do meet with municipalities when they are doing their development plans and zoning bylaws, and we really make sure we give them all the information that they need to understand how what they're proposing may impact producers, and certainly to give them what our provincial goals are for livestock development and for agriculture. You should know on the development plan side of things too that that is the one layer where there is some provincial approving authority, and that is because the Department of Indigenous and Municipal Relations oversees the development plan process. No development plan can be given third reading by municipality unless the Minister of IMR approves it. So if there are huge issues with a development plan in terms of what they're saying their livestock operations, and we're not getting anywhere in terms of trying to find compromises and work with the municipality, we do still have that opportunity to register an objection and make sure that whatever goes forward is fair. In terms of zoning bylaws, that goes to a municipal board hearing, so that's a little different. I will say though, we can talk about the provincial goals as much as we want to, and we do. I mean, we very much try and make sure we're representing that well when we meet with councils, but there is no replacement for individual ratepayers who live in the area coming forward and talking about the impacts to them and what their dreams and goals are, because it just means more to the councils because you're the ones who are in their municipality. So I would certainly encourage producers to get involved whenever possible.
Okay, and how long about does it take to complete the technical review process? Or about how long does it take?
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion about that. We've been looking at that recently, and it's certainly something that's going through a lean process right now. So we're trying to find ways to actually, obviously try and reduce the time as much as possible for everyone's benefit. What we've looked at right now is the minimum time we usually can see it going through, and that's going through the entire technical review process up until the conditional use, and then the municipality makes its decision. Up until the end of that, probably the minimum time you're looking at is 4 months, but that assumes that you've got a completed site assessment. The part that doesn't really get reflected in that 4-month minimum is the fact that it really does take a while to get that site assessment properly filled out and so that it's in a form that can be accepted by the technical review and that the process can begin.
Okay. If somebody is considering setting up a livestock operation, who should their first contact be?
I would say definitely, we always say talk to the municipality, but when I say that, I mean talk to the CAO, because a lot of times people will go and they'll talk to their local councillors. Development plans are redone anywhere from 5 to 8 years, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the council that's in place now has gone through the development plan process. They may not necessarily be aware of what's in their development plan or what the processes are. So a lot of times the producer will go to a council and council says, wow, that's a great idea, you should do that. And then, not realizing, of course, that it may not meet what they've got in their development plan. So I would say definitely talk to the CAO first. And if the CAO has questions, they certainly know how to reach us. They can talk to their local representative from Indigenous Municipal Relations, their local planner. The planners, we work with them all the time, and that's probably the best way to get the information out. But certainly I would say talk to the CAO first, or again, you can always contact us as well, or the planners in the office.
Okay, and I do have one last question. If you were approved for a certain number of animal units Is it species specific or transferable to other species if the operation changes?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and there has been a lot of misunderstanding on that. Generally speaking, the conditional use approval is evidence of what's ever written in it. Most conditional use approvals will say, this application came forward, they applied for, let's say, farrow to finish barn, and we approved this pig barn for 400 animal units, say. Now, if you have farrow to finish and you've got 400 animal units and you say, what, I think I really want to change my management system, I'm going to something else, I really just want to do weanlings, whatever, that's probably fine. So if you have the 400 animal units, as long as you're not going over that 400 animal units and changing within the same species, that's usually never an issue. Having said that, it really depends how a municipality writes its zoning bylaw, and in that case, you really do need to talk to the municipality. And again, by municipality, I mean the CAO or the development officer. And but changing from one species to another, I've never seen one where that has been something that can be successfully done. Now, if you stay under 300 animal units and you're not triggering a technical review and you're not triggering a conditional use in the local municipality, it probably is not a big deal. But once you have that conditional use approval and you're over 300 animal units, then any changes you make, you really need to go to the municipality, unless you're staying under that number. Does that answer the question, or is there?
So yeah, we didn't get anything else. Okay, that was all the questions. I will just say thank you for the awesome presentation, Sherry. I think you really helped lay out the steps for what can sometimes be a confusing process for producers who are thinking about expanding or setting up an operation. So that's great. And like Laurie said at the opening, this webinar will be recorded and it will be on YouTube. So if anybody wants to go back and watch it again, or if they missed anything, it will be up there. And I just have a couple of announcements before I let you go. Okay. Our next Stock Talk is going to be on March 21st, and it will be from 9 till 10 a.m. again. Our speaker is Michelle Gaudry, who is the Aboriginal Livestock Industry Development Specialist at Manitoba Agriculture, and she's going to be talking to us about bison nutrition. For more information about our webinars, our upcoming events, you can check out our website, and make sure to follow us on Twitter at mbgovag. And like I said, this webinar and all our webinars are recorded and are on YouTube. So if you would like to watch them again, or if you know anyone who'd be interested in the topic, please be sure to let them know. That's all for today. Thanks for joining us.